Hey, folks. Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. Yes, I am back in the United States in the familiar surroundings of the Watchman studio in the U.S. after, a whirlwind tour of the Middle East, 3 countries in 10 days, as I mentioned on yesterday's newscast. A memorable trip, to say the least. I'm still recovering, but it's all good because it was a trip I will never forget and so eye-opening, enlightening. Such great information was gleaned. Such great contacts were made as I visited Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. Now, Israel, obviously, many, many times I have been there. Jerusalem is my second home, but the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, it was my first time. And we'll talk about it a bit later today. Maybe we talk about it in the Q&A as well, because we've got a lot of breaking news to get into today. But I will say I was very encouraged from what I saw in these 2 nations, these Abraham Accords partners to Israel. But I'm back. I'm not exactly tanned and rested, but I'm recuperating. I'm getting back on East Coast of the United States time zone, everyday feel here. Still getting over the jet lag, but it's going to be all good. It was 10 days on the road again, but I'm kind of an old pro at this. As you all know, I'm on the road a bit and travel overseas a good deal now that things are picking up back up again. So without further ado, let's get into the breaking news and get serious for a minute. We've got a lot to get into today. We've been talking a lot this week about Russia and Israel, that unraveling relationship. We have a major new development on that front today involving Vladimir Putin. But let's start with some very infuriating news, tragic news, sad news. Yet again, we had a deadly terror attack just a few hours ago in Israel. Now, number one, this is Israel's Independence Day, the 74th, wow, 74 years, 1948. That's right, May 14th, 1948. 74 years ago, Israel declared its independence. Israel was reborn as a modern nation state. And Israelis are celebrating that very event today, the 74th Independence Day celebration. It's a day of great celebration would be the way to put it. There's barbecues, there's get-togethers, families and friends getting together outdoors in the beautiful May weather throughout the land of Israel. So this is a joyous occasion for sure. And yet, we had a terror attack in the city of Elad in central Israel. The latest details we have, folks, and this just broke about an hour and a half ago, is that 3 Israelis were murdered, several more injured. Apparently, this was an axe attack. We've seen all kinds over the years: knives, guns, car rammings, suicide bombings. This was apparently an axe used by at least 2 suspects who are apparently on the run right now. That's all we know right now, folks. If more, I'll be checking my phone and kind of checking the wires. We're here till 5 p.m. Eastern time. If anything new develops, I will let you know. Pray for the people of Israel right now. It's tough to even find words. This is 18 Israelis, 18 Jews murdered in the past month alone by a variety of Arab terrorists, whether these were ISIS-inspired terrorists who were Israeli Arabs or Palestinian terrorists. Hamas declared that it was behind a terror attack last Friday in which a 23-year-old Israeli was murdered in the great city of Ariel. He was a security guard there. Now we have 3 more murdered today. This is a nasty, nasty situation. And I was in Israel last week, as I mentioned at the top, and the people of Israel are strong and resilient. You don't see people walking around with their heads down, discouraged, living in fear. It's quite the opposite. Israelis are out. They are about. They are in the land. They are walking around the land. They have the spirit of joy about them. They have been resilient with the great hand of God on them and the help of the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Israelis not only survive, but they thrive. But again, breaking news here, this terror attack in Elad. When we have more details, we will certainly bring them to you. 18 murdered in the past month alone, folks. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the people of Israel. And right now, Hamas, and we want to get to the Russian news, but Hamas is threatening new attacks against Israel, threatening to escalate the violence. Obviously, they just did last Friday, murdering and claiming responsibility for it very proudly murdering that Israeli security guard in Ariel. And now today, on Israeli Independence Day, Thursday, May 5th, we have at least 1,000 Israeli Jews ascended the Temple Mount. They were allowed back on the Mount today, and they were greeted predictably and sadly by Palestinian rioters who have kind of set up shop on top of the Temple Mount over the past month. And these Jewish worshipers were, well, they're not allowed to pray openly on the Temple Mount. Remember, if you watched here with Danny the Digger, the special episode we did about the Temple Mount on the Watchman, Jews are not allowed to openly pray atop the Temple Mount. The holiest site in Judaism, the site of the first and second temples as described in the Bible, Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, and for Christians, look, that second temple is where Jesus taught, where he chased out the money changers, where as a 12-year-old boy, he went with his parents and he kind of stayed behind, as we know from the Gospels. That temple, the first temple where God's divine presence dwelt, where he showed himself in a mighty way as Solomon dedicated the temple, again, laid out in the Bible. Jews and Christians are not permitted to pray openly atop that very site where the temples once stood, but where today, of course, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock now stand. Muslims consider Jerusalem the third holiest site in Islam, although Jerusalem is never mentioned in the Quran, not even once. Now, I made that point a few weeks ago here on the newscast, and many Muslim viewers wrote in on the comments and said, "You're wrong. Al-Aqsa is mentioned in the Quran. Al-Aqsa is mentioned. You're wrong." Yes, Al-Aqsa is mentioned. The third Al-Aqsa, I don't believe is mentioned by name. First of all, the northernmost mosque is what's mentioned in the Quran. That's number one. Number two, the word Jerusalem is never mentioned. I know that. I'm not a Muslim, but I know the Quran well. I know the Hadiths well also, and I've studied them, and I know them because I need to know them. And Jerusalem's not in there. If you can find it, please write in on the comments. You say Al-Aqsa is mentioned. That's not mentioned either. The northernmost mosque is what's mentioned, and people are guesstimating that, oh, it must be the Al-Aqsa Mosque because that's in Jerusalem. So a little bit of a fact check here and a little bit of a reality check for everyone watching. And by the way, before I go any further, we have many people writing in. I'm just glancing off to the side of my laptop here and looking at our little chat that we have going on. Greetings, everyone. Shalom to everyone and happy Independence Day to all my Israeli friends, of course. We have people from Israel right now, from around the world who are watching live, tuning in, literally from every continent. Maybe we have a penguin or two in Antarctica watching, who knows? But we've got people from all around the world, and they are with us just as they are every week on the live stream. Hey, I love delivering the Watchman Newscast every day to you here on our YouTube channel, but the live streams are special, I have to say, because I get to have a conversation with you. We have a dialogue here, and I get to see who is watching, and it is people from all over the world. And man, I just kind of pinch myself, and I thank God for the opportunity to reach, let's see how many we have right now, thousands of viewers around the world right now, live and in living color here on the Watchman Newscast live stream. And we will, remember, have our Q&A to close out this live stream. We're going for another 51 minutes till 5 p.m. Eastern time, so stick around for the Q&A. But more about the Temple Mount. Hamas, obviously, today, Hamas sympathizers pelting these Jewish worshipers with stones, threats, insults. Israeli security services, Israeli police had to step in and escort these Jewish visitors from the Temple Mount. That's the sad state of affairs that we have today, where Jews are harassed when they ascend the Temple Mount, and they're not even allowed to pray there. You know, the Bible says that Isaiah 40, I believe, says, "My house will be a house of prayer for all nations." God says that his house is in Jerusalem, and it will be a house of prayer for all nations. All nations will be drawn to that light in Jerusalem. And yet Jews and Christians cannot pray atop the Temple Mount right now. And yes, the temples did stand on the Temple Mount, not in the city of David. I get some interesting comments about that and theories. But I think what sealed the deal for me there was obviously not that there was any doubt anyway. I've been to Israel many times, Jerusalem, walked the Temple Mount, walked the entire breadth of the city of David. And once you discover the Pool of Siloam and the pilgrimage road that leads right up to the Temple Mount where worshipers walked 2,000 years ago, including Jesus and the disciples, no doubt there, then you know what you have. And that's the reason the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque were built atop the Temple Mount. And it's the high place. It's elevated above all Jerusalem, where the city of David, a place I love, is down at the bottom of a valley. So we're correcting a lot of misconceptions today, but that is the situation with Hamas as we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the war between Israel and Hamas last May. 11 days of fierce fighting. I was in Israel on the ground shortly after that. And then I saw the devastation up close. We reported it here on the newscast. We showed you images of it, in particular in the city of Ashkelon, about, I think, 8 miles north, 10 miles, maybe 5. Ashdod, Ashkelon, I kind of mix up sometimes. Two beautiful cities where I've spent time on the beaches there. But Ashkelon really bore the brunt last year. Hundreds and hundreds of rockets in a short span of time were fired at Ashkelon during that war. So that's something else to keep an eye on, folks. Look, we have the 1-year anniversary coming up of that conflict, and Hamas would very much like, I'm sure, to mark that anniversary with, God forbid, new attacks, new rocket barrages. And remember, they're calling themselves the defenders of Jerusalem. They called the war last year the Sword of Jerusalem, I believe. And Hamas is portraying themselves to galvanize the Muslim world and to galvanize, in particular, the Palestinian people. Hamas is using Jerusalem as a cudgel. And they're saying, we're the defenders of Al-Aqsa. We're the defenders of Jerusalem. We're the defenders of Haram al-Sharif. That's what they call the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif. And we're fighting the good fight on your behalf. That's what Hamas is saying right now. So a very unpopular organization at home, which oppresses its people terribly, which takes the billions of dollars in international aid which flows into Gaza. Hamas, which rules Gaza with an iron fist, takes that aid money and pockets it and uses it to buy and build rockets and various deadly weapons and dig terror tunnels to be used against Israel. Hey, that concrete that's inside those terror tunnels, that's quite expensive. It could be used to build homes in Gaza, rebuild homes that have been turned many times upside down because of war, as Israel responds to thousands of rockets coming out of Gaza. But that's not the game Hamas plays. But they're going to incite and instigate and provoke once again right now. I fear, I don't fear, I would say concern would be the word, because I know God is in control. But I do know how Hamas operates, and they are not going to let this crisis go to waste. A self-manufactured crisis, which they created atop the Temple Mount. They did the same exact thing last year, folks. That's how that war kicked off. Hamas fired, I believe, 7 rockets in the direction of Jerusalem. Now, if Jerusalem is such a holy site for you, why are you bombarding it with rockets? Very interesting question, but that's exactly what happened in May 2021, and it's May 2022. Time flies, and things are a tinderbox once again atop the Temple Mount. And folks, I don't think this is any coincidence. The book of Zechariah says that Jerusalem, God's city, will become, in the latter days, will become like a burdensome stone. And anyone, any nation that comes against Jerusalem will be cut to pieces. Everyone covets Jerusalem. It's not only the center of the world geographically, it's increasingly becoming the center of the world in a geopolitical sense. Everyone wants a piece of Jerusalem. The Temple Mount, that's the most coveted piece of real estate in the world. And as tensions increase atop the Temple Mount, you're going to see more calls for some kind of international agreement where everyone can worship there. And the third temple in the works. And that is laid out pretty clearly in the Bible, in Daniel, in Revelation, that a third temple will be built. It's taboo for me to even say that, I know. I'm just quoting what it says in the Bible, that there will be a third temple. I don't know the plans right now. I know there are certainly forces in Israel who are very vocal and enthusiastic about it. I read an op-ed in the Jerusalem Post just 2 weeks ago saying it's time for the temple to be rebuilt. So, folks, that's coming. And we know it's coming, not because I said it, because the word of God says it. In a prophetic sense, that is coming. So what's going to precipitate that, how it's going to come about, we don't know, but it is going to come about. That I know. And with all the tumult surrounding the Temple Mount right now and what's going on there, hey, that's a massive plaza, I would describe it as. I've spent much time atop the Temple Mount and walked it, and it is large. The size, it was described to me in June when I was atop the Temple Mount, the size of several soccer fields, football, not the football that I play, but European football, soccer, several soccer fields, we would say in the States. That's the Temple Mount. You could fit a temple there right now, folks. I mean, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is there. The Dome of the Rock is there. There's plenty of room to build a third large structure, no doubt. So we'll see how that all comes about and how that prophecy is fulfilled. But that day is coming, no doubt. So turn your eyes towards Jerusalem, because that is the center of God's prophetic time clock right now and the events unfolding in Jerusalem. Everyone wants a peace. Vladimir Putin, we detailed it on the newscast a few weeks ago. He just wrote a letter to Naftali Bennett, the Israeli prime minister, late last month, demanding that control of a church in the old city of Jerusalem. It's called the Alexander Nevsky Church. He wants control turned over to him. Russia wants to control this church in the old city. It's right next to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which, of course, many believe that's the site where Jesus was crucified, died, buried. They built a church over it. Then you have the Garden Tomb, of course, my preference, my favorite place, the Garden Tomb, which I love, outside of the Damascus Gate. But Church of the Holy Sepulchre is there, and the Alexander Nevsky Church is right next door. Now, this church was built in the 19th century. Not sure how it changed hands over the years, but long story short, Russia had imprisoned an Israeli citizen on, I think, drug charges. Benjamin Netanyahu, the former prime minister, lobbied to have her released. She was indeed released. And part of the agreement, apparently, was Israel said, okay, we will give you control of the Alexander Nevsky Church. I assume it's a Russian Orthodox church. I have not been inside of it. The church next door, Holy Sepulchre, been there many times. Now, that was 2018, 2019. Last year, apparently, or it might have been even more recent than that, an Israeli court decided, and I don't know all of the things, all of the deliberations surrounding this ruling, but an Israeli court decided, no, we're not going to hand over control of the Alexander Nevsky Church to Russia. All of that said, Vladimir Putin is not very happy about that. He wants a chunk of Jerusalem as well. He wants to control that church in the heart of the Christian quarter in the old city of Jerusalem. Not only that, he's wading in more and more to the Jerusalem issue writ large. He believes, and he's made this very clear, he and his regime, that Jerusalem, or at least half of it, should be under Palestinian control and should be the capital of a future Palestinian state. As a matter of fact, and we reported this on yesterday's newscast, if you missed any of our newscasts this week, be sure to tune in. They're in our archives here right under newscast. If you missed the first 20 minutes or so of this live stream, you can also catch them here in our archives under newscast. Of course, while you're there, be sure to subscribe. Do us a big favor, subscribe. I assume if you're with us here on the live stream, there's a very good chance that you are already a subscriber. But if you're not, hey, subscribe, give us a big thumbs up, and join our Watchman team, the watchmen and women on the wall, the modern day sons and daughters of Issachar, for such a time as this. We can't do it without you. We're approaching 500,000 subscribers now, folks. I can't believe it. In February 2021, we were at 157,000. So we have grown in the past 15 months by 300,000 subscribers. And really, at the end of the day, I had nothing to do with it. It was all you watching faithfully. Thank you so much. And it was God Almighty just blessing us, expanding our territory, and giving us this mantle, this mandate for such a time as this to spread the truth and be a watchman, be watchmen and women on the wall. But I reported yesterday, in case you missed it, that senior Hamas leaders are in Moscow right now. Apparently, they flew in on Tuesday night to meet with senior Russian officials from the Russian Foreign Ministry. Now, does that include Russia's top diplomat, the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, long-running foreign minister who is very close to Vladimir Putin? We're not sure yet. I have not seen pictures or video from this meeting yet, but we do know it is indeed happening. And perhaps this Hamas delegation, I read one report in Arab media, it may even meet with the leader, the Chechen leader, the warlord in Chechnya as well, who's also close to Putin. So we want more details from this meeting. We don't have them quite yet, but they arrived Tuesday night. It was a Hamas leadership delegation of Hamas leaders who live outside of Gaza. One of them was a guy by the name of Musa Abu Marzouk. Now, he's been with Hamas since the very beginnings. 1987, the charter was written up, the Hamas charter, which called for the destruction of Israel, their founding charter. And this was someone who lived in the United States, Musa Abu Marzouk, for years. Thankfully, he's gone now, but he lived here freely and helped spread Hamas propaganda from the United States. He is in Moscow along with a delegation of other Hamas leaders, and they're discussing Jerusalem. Surprise, surprise. They are discussing reportedly the tensions above or atop the Temple Mount and surrounding Al-Aqsa, and Russia surely is giving Hamas and the Palestinians its full-throated support in what is becoming a battle over Jerusalem and the Temple Mount increasingly. Now, again, we need more details out of this meeting, but we have the general idea of what they'll be discussing. And talk about timing, just as this is all descending into chaos in Jerusalem and on the Temple Mount, Russia rolls out the red carpet for one of Israel's mortal enemies. You know, I say a lot when it comes to Vladimir Putin, you can tell a lot about a man by the company he keeps. Who are his friends? Who are Vladimir Putin's friends? Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian regime, Bashar al-Assad in Syria, Xi Jinping, the brutal dictator of the Chinese Communist regime, and Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea. Oh, also Maduro in Venezuela, also a dictator, and Lukashenko in Belarus. You guessed it, a dictator. This is the company he keeps. And I lay that out for you. And by the way, among the company he keeps are some of the world's most notorious anti-Semites and anti-Christian forces and persecutors of the church. This is the company he keeps. I say this, and I almost become weary in saying it, and we've gone through this on previous live streams, actually, and I got a bit frustrated by it because, man, oh man, we focused a lot on the Israel-Russia relationship this week, and we're going to do it in a second. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we had newscasts devoted to the unraveling of the Israel-Russia relationship and the prophetic implications. I'm thinking Gog, Magog, Ezekiel 38 and 39. Folks, I have to tell you, I actually read the comments as much as I can. I'm a busy guy, and you're all busy too. I'm not whining about it, but I try to check in on the comments at least once a day and see what's going on, see what people want to see, what people are saying. I have to tell you, these past 3 days, we have had a sizable contingent of pro-Vladimir Putin commenters, of Putin apologists, of people who are historical revisionists and who are staunch defenders of Putin's regime and Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. It's a fact. So I feel compelled to say this once again, since a considerable chunk, it seems, of our commenters the past few days, again, have been saying Russia is right to invade Ukraine. Vladimir Putin, I stand with Putin, and he is a defender of Christianity and the West. This is the narrative that I'm seeing in the comments. And Lavrov was right, that Jews worked with the Nazis on a grand scale, and the worst anti-Semites were the Jews, and Russia really is in Ukraine to denazify Ukraine. That's a narrative here. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I want to get into Israel and Russia, but my gosh, Folks, what did I just lay out for you? Look at who Putin and the Russian regime today. I'm not anti-Russia. I love the Russian people. I have an issue with the regime there, just as I do in Iran. I love the people of Iran. The people of Russia are great people with a proud history and civilization. I love the people of Russia, but the regime is an issue. And when you're rubbing shoulders gleefully with Hamas, hosting them red carpet this week, just as they're inciting riots against Israel, when you're in bed and shoulder to shoulder with Hezbollah, Iran, and Assad in Syria, with China, with the brutal communist dictatorship in Beijing, with North Korea, for God's sake, then we might have an issue. And you might not be a very nice guy or a friend to Christians and Jews and the Jewish state. Call me crazy. Then we had Lavrov's comments, which I referenced earlier this week, where again he says, we are in Ukraine to denazify Ukraine. The denazification of Ukraine, that's why we invaded. Folks, do you really believe that? The reason Russia invaded was to root out the Nazis in Ukraine who posed an existential threat to the Russian state. Is that really the reason they invaded? Or did Vladimir Putin invade Ukraine because he wants to reestablish the Soviet empire, bring Ukraine into his domain and under his control once again, and exploit the natural resources in that country and use Ukraine as the first step in, again, a revived Soviet empire? This is a man of great and ruthless ambition. You really think he's fighting a noble cause and saying, we're going to fight against the neo-Nazis and root them out? That's why I'm going into Ukraine. It's a convenient canard and an excuse. Was he fighting Nazis when he slaughtered hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians throughout that country? Come on. You're tying yourself in knots trying to defend this man and defend this invasion. The Azov brigades, yes, they exist in Mariupol, in the eastern half of Ukraine, I know. According to most estimates, it's about 900 men. And certainly there are neo-Nazi ties among the Azov brigade. That's number one. Number two, I'm not saying the government in Ukraine is perfect by a long stretch, and there's corruption there, absolutely. But do you really mean to tell me that Russia invaded Ukraine strictly with what, 150,000, I believe, men, tanks, full bore, to root out neo-Nazis? That's really the reason? You really believe that's the reason they invaded Ukraine? To hear Lavrov tell it, Ukraine is just littered from top to bottom, border to border, 44 million people, and most of them are Nazis. That's the narrative that's being painted. I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. I think most people aren't buying it. If we live in days where common sense is not so common, but wake up. The Azov Brigade, again, a battalion established a few years ago, certainly with a neo-Nazi element, no doubt. Probably 900 men. That's not why Russia invaded. Come on, get serious. And I've heard also Lavrov's comments, Hitler was Jewish, he brings up, slightly offensive comment. Number one, this has been a long-standing theory, rumor that Hitler's grandfather was Jewish. Lavrov, the top diplomat in Russia, throws that out there, says that's his opinion. That's going to do wonders, Sergei, for your relations with Israel, let me tell you. Secondly, he says Jews are the worst anti-Semites. Jews were responsible for murderous deeds during the Holocaust. His foreign ministry said that. And of course, people say, look at George Soros. He's a Jew and he's horrible. He hates the Jewish people, hates Israel. Yeah, agreed on all fronts. That's one person. To hear Lavrov tell it, you had thousands and thousands of Jewish anti-Semites and collaborators working hand in hand with the Nazis and perpetrating the Holocaust. This is madness. Did some Jews in that situation collaborate? Yes, they did. And the Jewish people will be the first to condemn them. There was a small element, yes. But to hear Lavrov tell it and to hear some of the commenters say, you would think this was a widespread, massive thing. It's insane. But what about George Soros? Bad guy, I know. It's one person. There's, I think, 15 million Jews around the world. The Azov Brigade, 900 men. A military of 250,000 in Ukraine and a country of 44 million? Come on. These are lame arguments. It just get serious. I mean, come on. We have some very intelligent folks here. And again, here we go. Zelensky's no hero either. He's just as crooked as Putin. Do your homework. Okay. Even if the Ukrainian government, they're not angels, even if that's the case. And I don't know them well. I don't know them personally. I see the fruits of Vladimir Putin, and they're bitter black fruits. Even if the government in Ukraine, let's say, are not nice guys, do they deserve what's happening right now? There's plenty of governments around the world that may not be the paragon of virtue when it comes to corruption. Do they all deserve to be invaded and have civilians slaughtered? Come on. Two wrongs don't make a right. I'm astounded by it. I'm astounded by the reasoning here and the apologism, if that's a word. It's unbelievable. And it's actually quite disheartening. And that's why I'm getting into it real quick. Calling Jews anti-Semites. And meanwhile, you're aligned, Putin, with the worst anti-Semites in the world, with modern day Nazis. You're talking about Israel supporting Nazis in Ukraine, yet you are standing shoulder to shoulder proudly with Hamas, the Iranian regime, and Hezbollah, who are modern day Nazis. The only thing that's not in their ideology is white supremacism. In every way, they match up perfectly with Hitler's ideology of slaughtering the Jews. Folks, wake up. That's why I'm saying this. My gosh. And the other argument, Putin, the mainstream media hates Putin, so he must be good. Hey, I don't like the mainstream media either. But again, two wrongs don't make a right. Just because the mainstream media doesn't like Putin doesn't mean he's automatically a good guy. Come on, let's think here. And people say, you only have half the facts. I've got the facts. I just laid them out for you. Someone respond right now, please. And then we'll move on. But I had to get into it. Thank you for humoring me, because it's becoming an issue. This narrative is growing, and there needs to be people with some backbone and some knowledge who are going to push back against it and say, wait a minute, you're wrong. No, Putin is not a good guy. And the invasion of Ukraine, for the love of God, was not justifiable. But there we have it. I have more to share, but this is becoming a major issue. And it's a narrative that's catching on by people who should know better, including Christians, including followers of Jesus, running with this narrative. Please, before I move on to Russia and Israel, another sign of this regime not being very nice, please, before I go, I've never heard anyone yet, when I throw this out there, please justify this. And someone makes a great point. There are Nazis in almost every country on this planet. Patricia Blanton, one of our commenters, Patricia, great point. There are. Should those countries all be invaded? I'm sad to say there are neo-Nazis living in the United States right now, and in Europe as well, I'm sure. Should they be invaded? If the rationale for Russia to invade Ukraine is to denazify it and root out all the Nazis, there's probably more Nazis, neo-Nazis, living in the US and Europe, right? Ukraine's a country of 44 million. In the US, we have 320 million. I don't believe neo-Nazism is anywhere near any kind of large epidemic in the United States, but they're here. Those fringe elements are certainly here. We probably have more than Ukraine does. We have a larger population. Should America be brought to heel and invaded and denazified? This is insane rationale. And people are buying this. Wake up and answer me before I go. If Vladimir Putin is a good guy and he is justified, and we've all been deluded and tricked and fooled by the mainstream media about Vladimir Putin's really a good guy and this invasion's justified, it's denazification. If all that's true, and he's a great Christian, hey, he wears a cross around his neck. That means he must be a Christian, right? There's a difference, folks, to say you're a Christian and to act and to walk the Christian walk. Big difference. If all that's true, then why is he slaughtering civilians, Christians in Ukraine? And why is he aligned with the world's worst persecutors of Christianity, China, Iran, and North Korea? Why? Answer me that. You can tell a lot about a man by the company he keeps. And why, oh why? is he aligned with the world's modern day Nazis, the greatest enemies of Israel, who are devoted to the genocide of Israel, the destruction of Israel and the Jewish people, the Iranian regime, Hamas, and Hezbollah. Why? Answer me. Do you feel good about supporting a man who is literally in bed and in league with the Ayatollahs in Tehran, with Hamas, Hezbollah, with Xi Jinping in Beijing, with Kim Jong-un and Pyongyang? You really feel good about that? And don't respond by saying, well, Ukraine's bad too. They're corrupt too. We're talking about Vladimir Putin. So that even if Ukraine, say they're bad, they're corrupt, does that justify Russia with a sweeping invasion, slaughtering civilians and bombing cities? An unprovoked invasion? I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe it's a world turned upside down. I'm the crazy one. I think the thing that frustrates me the most about this is people who should know better are buying this narrative. People who I can tell, the people who love the Lord, who really love the Lord, have even commented and said, well, Eric, wait a minute now. Zelensky's not a good guy. And Ukraine, even if that's the case, and I'm not saying it is, even if it is the case, is that your justification for what Putin is doing right now? Is that your justification for why he's inviting Hamas with open arms to Moscow and embracing Iran, Hezbollah, China, and North Korea? Wow. I had to respond because we do have this narrative growing. Anyway, I said my piece. I say never hold your peace at the end of every newscast, right? Well, I didn't hold my peace. Thank you for allowing me to share that. I hope some of it made sense. You ever see a movie called Cool Hand Luke, folks? Great flick with Paul Newman. There's a great line in it, a memorable line, where one of the bad guys says, some men you just can't reach. I think in this case, there's some men and women that I just won't reach, but it's okay. I said my piece, and thank God that he gave me the platform to be able to do it, because I'm in the truth-telling business, and we live in times of universal deceit, it seems, and to see conservative-minded folks on the right who sincerely love Jesus run and carry Vladimir Putin's water and try to defend him here, that's distressing to me. It's like, whoa, guys, wake up. Come on. Are we really that blinded now? Where's your discernment? You've got the Holy Spirit. Where's your discernment? Come on. Again, overriding theme here. No matter what you think of Ukraine, the Ukrainian leadership, the mainstream media, two wrongs don't make a right. And just because people you don't like stand against Putin, and frankly, in the case of mainstream media, people I don't like either, that doesn't make Putin a victim and a good guy. Speaking of which, the Russia-Israel relationship. Breaking news, it's in the thumbnail, so I better get into it by this point. Vladimir Putin, apparently, according to the Israeli Prime Minister's office, apologized today for those comments I talked about by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. Now, Putin called, or I don't know who called who, but he held a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. And according to the printout of the meeting from Israel's Prime Minister's office, Putin apologized for Lavrov's comments. His top diplomat's comments, if you're in America like I am, that's the equivalent of the Secretary of State. Third man in line, basically. Lavrov said, again, Hitler was a Jew. Jews are the worst anti-Semites. His foreign minister released a statement saying Israel supports neo-Nazis, that Jews were behind murderous, heinous crimes in the Holocaust. So, yeah, there might be an apology in store for that. That might be slightly offensive to the Jewish people, especially when Israel is in the midst of a terror wave in which 18 Israelis have been murdered by modern-day Nazis. A bit offensive. An apology may be in order, but did Putin apologize? Now, Naftali Bennett's office said he did, but it was very interesting to me. The Russian, I guess you would call it the printout, the readout of the meeting, did not mention an apology. So we'll see where this goes. Was this, perhaps he said, I regret it. Maybe he thinks he didn't apologize. Vladimir Putin strikes me as a very prideful guy who's not going to admit when he's wrong. And I'd like to know more. I'd like to see more of what was said in the meeting. I'm not saying the Israeli government is incorrect by any means, and that they're not being truthful. I'm not saying that, but I'd like to know what exactly Putin said and kind of read between the lines. He's a very savvy, very cagey actor, KGB, I should say, no pun intended, but former KGB, but very cagey actor and very savvy. So I'd like to know exactly what he said in direct quotes, but is that enough to cool tensions? Allow me to check what's going on right now, too. Let's see. Let's see the latest. If we have any updates, pardon me, folks, as I look down at my phone here. And let's see if we got any more news on. Okay, we've got a manhunt going. That terror attack I described today in Israel, in the city of Elad in central Israel. 3 killed, 1 in critical condition. Pray. It works. Pray for the person in critical condition. Pray for the families of those who were lost. Pray, and may their memories be a blessing. More on Putin. Putin apologizes for his envoy's Jewish Hitler comments, Bennett's office says. I'd like to hear more about what Putin's office says, but is this enough to quiet down things, to de-escalate tensions between Israel and Russia? Is that enough? We shall see. I think the genie's out of the bottle, so to speak, and I think things are unraveling pretty rapidly. I take no joy in saying that, folks, because Israel has very much wanted to maintain warm relations with Russia, but that's becoming impossible. The only nations right now that have, quote, warm relations with Russia is the rogues gallery that I listed earlier, the likes of Assad in Syria, North Korea, China, Iran, Venezuela. You don't want to be a part of that party. And Israel has been trying to strike this delicate balance of maintaining good relations with Ukraine and Russia. Why? Well, part of it is obviously there's a large Jewish population in Russia. Israel is concerned about their security. There's been, let's just say, some major strains and waves of anti-Semitism to sweep through Russia and Ukraine, for that matter, over the past century and a half or so. That's number one. But number two, look, and the big issue that Israel points to is Israel needs to maintain, in their view, good relations with Russia to preserve their ability to operate freely in Syria. We've talked about this on the newscast many times, and you guys know this if you're watching and you're here with us. And by the way, how many do we have from around the world? We have several thousand people with us right now. That is very nice. Okay. Iran, Hezbollah building up advanced arms in Syria at Israel's northern doorstep, but Russia controls the skies. Thousands of Russian troops in Syria right now. If Russia wants to put the clamp down and say, Israel, no more, you cannot operate here any longer, it would be very tough for Israel. And that would be a collision course. There's a diplomatic collision course right now. If you've been watching the newscast, you know I believe there will be a great betrayal, which will ultimately lead to a real physical collision course where Russia, that country to the uttermost north of Israel, leads a latter days. Ezekiel calls it the latter days confederation of nations, including Iran, which comes against Israel. Book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. If you haven't read it, be sure to read it and remember it. Now, the good news is this confederation doesn't get very far, and they meet their demise on the mountains of Israel, courtesy of the God of Israel, who shows his face in a way he hasn't in 2,000 years to all of humanity. That day is coming. But in the meantime, we're seeing the unraveling right now, and things become difficult in Syria, and that's a red line, an existential threat for Israel to have Iran and Hezbollah stockpiling precision-guided ballistic missiles at their doorstep. Israel cannot abide by this, clearly. But if Russia says, too bad, you're going to have to abide by it because we're not going to let you operate freely in Syria anymore. We're closing down the airspace. Enough is enough. Then things become very difficult. Israel will have to find another way. And by the way, look, right now, Vladimir Putin doesn't have very many friends, folks, and Russia doesn't either. Who are his friends who have stuck by him through thick and thin? Iran and Syria at the top of the list. So right now, they're not just right now, for years, they've been saying to Putin, why are you allowing Israel to hit us? and to weaken us militarily in Syria. Why don't you step up and say no more? Now, maybe Russia said in the past, yeah, guys, whatever. We want a good relationship with Israel too, economic reasons, a lot of reasons. But now Russia might be saying, you know what? You're right. And by the way, we don't have many friends left. We're in a position now where Russia actually needs Syria and Iran in a way that they haven't before. Vladimir Putin scans the global landscape. He's been isolated, and Syria and Iran are two of the only forces that are standing with them. He kind of needs them. And maybe he needs to give a little bit right now. Maybe he says, you know what, guys? Yeah, okay, I'll throw you a bone. I'll tell Israel no more. They're already trying, the Russians are already trying to make Israel's life difficult at the UN. They're talking about Jerusalem, dividing Jerusalem, supporting the Palestinians, hosting Hamas, saying the Golan Heights does not belong to Israel, it belongs to Syria. This is ramping up. It's heating up. And let's see what happens in Syria. Russia, obviously, you would think, doesn't want to open another front, not a front, but a very tense hotspot and be at loggerheads, be at odds with another nation that also is a formidable military force, nuclear armed in the form of Israel. You would think, but folks, does anyone know what's going on in Vladimir Putin's head right now? That's number one. In number two, in the past 12 years, especially since the onset of the so-called Arab Spring, which quickly devolved into an Islamist winter, expect the unexpected in the Middle East. We had, in the span of 2 or 3 years, 2 massive revolutions in Egypt. Back in 2011, 2012, 2013, the madness going on there. 2 major revolutions, millions of people in the streets. That's in the Arab world's most influential and populous nation. Expect the unexpected in today's Middle East. How about the Abraham Accords? Did you see that coming? There was murmurings behind the scenes for the past few years, but then one day in August 2020, the announcement came, and a month later, I was at the White House, on the White House lawn, observing the signing ceremony with the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel. We live in Bible times, and we've got a front row seat. Let's get into some questions here. Daniel, our producer, is sending a few along. And what do we have? What do we have here? It better be good. Just kidding. I know they'll be good. Let's see. I have to thank Eleanor, who is reviewing her membership for the 3rd month. Okay. Well, Eleanor, I hope you stay with us, or renewing, I guess, renewing your membership. Eleanor Rector. Eleanor, shout out here from the Watchman. Thanks so much for being with us. 3 months as a premium subscriber. Hey, God bless you. We appreciate you being here with us every week on the live streams, every day on the newscast. Eleanor is a premium member, folks. And I should have mentioned, you can become a premium member here on the newscast. You don't have to become one. It's not mandatory. You can still watch the newscast and the live stream, even if you're not a premium member. But it's a nice addition. For $4.99 a month, you get some premium access to different content and brand new Watchmen shows every week. We have some behind the scenes commentary. Also, you help to keep the channel on the air. All of this isn't free, unfortunately. So that's appreciated greatly as well. So Eleanor, shout out to you, Eleanor Rector. God bless you. Thanks so much for joining us. We truly, truly appreciate it. 3 months as a premium member. Let's get into some questions here. And Michael Spencer. Let's see, Michael. What do you have for me here? I got a question. He says, for those who are against Israel and Jews, I think, or do they think of Jews as a state or a race? I would think both, Michael. The enemies of Israel, for sure. The Jewish people, the Jewish state. I think that they look at the Jewish people, and Hitler certainly looked at the Jewish people, in their view, as a race of people and a state for the Jewish people. For sure, that's how they view it. You're talking about the enemies. If all of the state of Israel, more than Jews, would be their targets. Okay, I see where he's getting at. Michael says, if all of Israel was the target of Israel's enemies, then everyone in Israel would be a target, including Israeli Arabs. There are millions of Israeli Arabs. There are many non-Jews who live in Israel as well. But no, the main target, Israel, by and large, 9 million people, I believe, in Israel today, 6 to 7 million Jews. The Jewish people obviously are the target of the likes of the Iranian regime, Hamas and Hezbollah. And yet, in what has been at times indiscriminate bombings and rockets, non-Jews have been murdered, have been killed in Israel, courtesy of terror attacks, a good number of non-Jews. If Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah were such great defenders of the Muslim peoples there and of the Palestinians, of the Arabs, they don't seem to shed many tears when their own rockets and bombs fall on their own people. Exhibit A, the May 2021 war, where several Palestinians, I don't know how many, but a good number, were killed when Hamas fired rockets from Gaza, and the rockets did not reach Israel. They actually fell inside of Gaza, inside Palestinian communities, and killed Palestinians. There wasn't many tears shed by Hamas over that. So, look, the Jewish people, Michael, to answer your question, are clearly the main target, but they're not shedding tears if there's some, in their words, collateral damage along the way. Eleanor Rector, you had a question too. Daniel, if we have that, send that along. I think you said Russia. I saw it first. It went by quickly on the chat, but Russia and the Confederation, how they're going to build it. I'll answer that in a second. Let's see what else we have here. Wow, this is a good question. Every Mulder, what are the chances of a great revival coming out of Russia? Now that would be exciting. Well, we saw a revival of sorts, right? About 30 years ago when the wall fell and when the Soviet Union collapsed. After some 75 years of official, brutal, state-sanctioned, godless atheism under the communist regime there, the Soviet Union collapsed. And all of a sudden, we see Billy Graham in Moscow. What an amazing sight. And great evangelists going to Russia, seeing this great mission field. And people were hungry for God, hungry for the gospel, hungry for the Lord Jesus, who they had been deprived of for close to a century. So we saw certainly a wave in Russia, in the former Soviet republics like Ukraine in the early 90s that seems to have tapered off these days. Russia, like much of the Western world, has many problems: alcoholism, pornography, many nasty problems, poverty there, violence, organized crime, much like we have here in the West, I have to say, in many quarters. So, but Russia has its issues for sure. And it could use, I think, for sure, a renewing, a spiritual renewal and a revival. Could it come out of this war? I see a few scenarios here. If this war continues to go badly, and it has not gone well, don't buy the propaganda, it's not going well for Russia. They've lost at least 12 generals on the battlefields of Ukraine. That's not a good thing. Their initial offensive, Kyiv, failed miserably. They couldn't take the capital. They had to regroup. Now they're focusing on the east of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin thought it was going to be a cakewalk. He thought he was going to march in, topple the government, and occupy Ukraine, much like he did Crimea in 2014. That did not happen. There's been fierce resistance. But if more Russian soldiers are killed, and according to most estimates, thousands have already been killed in under 3 months of war, if great hardship comes to Russia through this war, the economy struggles. And look, people are cutting ties with Russia in the economic sphere, of course. I'm sad to say that many times revival just doesn't spontaneously happen when times are great. Folks, you know your Bible. Look at ancient Israel. Many times revival comes in a great awakening when times are tough. When the going gets tough, all of a sudden, man, people get on their knees and they cry out to God. You ever heard that phrase, there's no atheists in foxholes in a time of war, for instance? Well, when times get tough, everyone all of a sudden looks up and says, help me. I'm in big trouble, God. I need you. I haven't talked to you in 5 years, but now I need you. Help me. Then you have the ground becomes fertile for revival. It's sad that it works that way, isn't it? That a lot of times it's hardship that brings on the revival. But we could see that in Russia, certainly, if this Ukraine war spirals out of control and brings economic hardship upon the nation, God forbid. But It's a possibility. Also, I think the Ezekiel war, clearly, the after effects of that, where, look, the Bible says some 85% of those invading forces, and Eleanor Rector, this will answer your question, Russia, Iran, Turkey, part of that coalition, the Stan nations, a lot of people believe, the former Soviet republics. Libya is named. Will it literally be the nation Libya? Could it be other North African nations as well? Ethiopia is named. Is it literally Ethiopia, or is that more representative of several Eastern African nations on the Horn of Africa? We don't know. But the three sure shots, I believe, are Russia, Turkey, and Iran leading that confederation. If 85% of that confederation that invades Israel is struck down on the mountains of Israel, that is a crisis of just massive proportions, where I think the entire world, after the war of Gog and Magog, clearly it's going to be a sovereign act of God striking these forces down. And I think many people will turn to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, no doubt. And especially, you would think, in the countries most affected, countries like Russia, where your boys aren't coming home. They were struck down on the mountains of Israel. And all of a sudden, maybe there's something to this God thing, and maybe he really, truly exists. That's another way you could see major revival. Hey, thank you to Denver Johnson, a new Watchman premium member. Thanks a lot, Denver. You can go to join here, folks, on the homepage. Just click on join and become a premium member. We got a lot of fun things planned for you, and we're trying to build that out, the premium membership. Again, if you're not a premium member, I still love you, and you can still watch every day. But if you want some cool extra perks and fun and get to know me a little bit better, premium membership is a great way to do it. Okay, let's see what else we have. Some more questions. We're running a little short, and I have an itch on my nose. I apologize. It was not a pick. If you ever see that Seinfeld episode, funny one, Jerry says, I didn't pick. It was not a pick. It was a scratch. Got a little itch going on here. Let's see. What do we have here? Commenter's name is Crisco Duck, not to be confused with Disco Duck. Hi, Eric. I know you're a Philly native and no need for the specifics, but around what area in Philly did you grow up in? Just curious if we grew up in the same area. I will not tell you where I live now, but I will tell you I was a proud product of Fox Chase in Northeast Philadelphia. I had the greatest upbringing. Man, Fox Chase was a special place to grow up. So tight-knit, everyone looked out for one another. The torch was passed from generation to generation, the older guys to the younger guys. I did everything at Fox Chase Playground. We call it the Rec, Fox Chase Recreation Center. Sports, hanging out with friends, first kiss, all that fun stuff, all happened at Fox Chase Rec. That was my second home. I should have got my mail there. I was there so much. I lived there. And Northeast Philadelphia, Fox Chase, great place to grow up. My father was from a neighborhood in Philadelphia called Kensington, K&A, Kensington and Allegheny. My mother was from a neighborhood called Summerdale. And I'm a Philly boy through and through, and love the city. Hate to see what's happening there now and what the left is doing to destroy the city. But Philly's in my blood, and it made me who I am for sure. So Fox Chase will always be my first home, no doubt. Love it. So it's a little bit about me here on the live stream. Let's see. One more question. We have time for one more question. Crisco Duck, you're from Frankfurt. My dad went to Frankfurt High School. K&A guy. I had cousins who went there as well. If you're not from Philly, you're probably thinking, what the heck are they talking about? Trust me, it's good stuff. The good old days. The good old days. Special place, special times to grow up. Okay, one last question here. What do we have? Give me something good. Looks like we're running out here. Got a new member, JD Wolfen. I like your last name, Wolfen. I hear a lot. Okay, last question. I hear a lot of Russians are Muslim, but I don't know, asks Miss Jamie. There is a Russia, certainly there are Muslims in Russia proper, but when you're thinking of the Russian populations, you're thinking more the Russian-speaking Muslims, you're thinking more the stands. You're thinking Chechnya, of course, which is to the south of Russia, a Muslim republic there, Ossetia and these other little Muslim areas there in the south. But you're thinking of Russians who live in Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, sizable Muslim population there as well. And in Russia itself, you do have a Muslim population, but the overwhelming number of Russians subscribe to the Orthodox faith. So that's some of the demographics there in Russia. That's a good one to, someone says, hold on, Eric, don't go yet, says JB Maps, who's a premium member. I don't want to go, believe me. I love spending time with you guys. Someone asks, are you CIA? Huh, okay. Not quite, but I'm a media personality. CIA, interesting. Let's see. Gotta go, guys. But do you think Russia will use nukes? That's one to really go on. God forbid. Pray it doesn't happen, but expect the unexpected today. Tactical nukes, is that outside the realm of possibility? I don't know. We live, folks, in Bible times. We live in perilous times. I'll leave you with this. God Almighty still sits on the throne. Do not fear. Do not fret. Do not be hiding under your couch. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is in control. He sent his son to die for you. If you don't know him, get to know him. Don't put it off another day. Don't say, well, I'll go back to church in a month. Or I'm not quite ready to be a Christian. I'm not ready to quit certain things in my life. Next year, that'll be my New Year's resolution. I'll accept Jesus into my heart and I'll start walking with him, but not yet. Hey, you might not have next year. You might not have next month the way things are going. Not being an alarmist trying to scare you, but people have been saying this for a while, for 2,000 years. Hey, watch. You might say 2,000 years. What are the signs of his coming? Well, to God, 1,000 years is like a day. That's what the Bible says. 2,000 years to God Almighty, that was just yesterday. Get right with him now. Don't put it off. Don't put it off. I want to be at the great celebration with you in heaven in the presence of Jesus one day with all of you. And I pray that's the case. God bless you all. Until next time, thanks for joining us. This was a fun one. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They need it now more than ever, and never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.